Hey CDA, and here's my guide on Corsair Cove, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite games of the year. Now, there's a couple of quick tips and tricks that you might want to take into account while you're playing this game for the first time. Now, although the game has a pretty decent tutorial, there's a lot of things that the game doesn't explicitly tell you that are easy to miss. For example, when you're building housing, the game will actually show you in a nice pop-up over here how much housing you need for this particular pirate camp. And as you are building houses, you can see this adding up so you know exactly how many you need to build. No need to do any special math. Now, while you're expanding your town, you might also want to take into consideration one of the alternative views. If you press the Alt button, the info layer is over here though, you can check for specific buildings. You can also filter these buildings if you click on those. But the most important one, I think, is the deposit overview. This makes it very easy to see everything that is on the map, but it's also really important that you note which of the are the fertile zones. These are the zones where you're going to have to build specific buildings, like for example very early on the woodcutter, but all the other buildings that don't need to be in a fertile zone should not go there. I made a more detailed optimization guide for this as well, but generally speaking, this is what your production facility should look like. Only buildings that really need to be on fertile ground should be in there, so sugarcane farms, woodcutters, things like that. And then all the other buildings, the production buildings, should be on the wall somewhere. So relatively close, of course, to your fertile zones, but not on them, because that means you're just gonna run out of fertile zones really quickly. There's pretty much just one example I would want to make for this, and that is the pirate camps themselves, because they need to be kind of central to a location, so it's kind of hard to avoid putting them on a fertile zone, and it's not the worst thing in the world if there's just one or two buildings on it, but try to avoid it as much as possible. Another very basic tip that I will give you that is definitely going to make your life a lot easier is to build warehouses next to your production center. So for example, over here I'm producing rum and the barrels are being used for the rum. I'm just stockpiling those in a central warehouse because that makes it very easy to export them elsewhere. And it also means that the fetchers that are going to do that exporting can be centralized in this warehouse itself. And by then enabling the all hands on deck buff, I can double up on my fetchers in this case to double my transportation. Now, if you overclock another building, so for example the distillery over here, I can also enable all hands on deck on that as well. It is just going to improve your production by 50%, but you're still going to double your upkeep. So it's a lot less efficient than with the warehouses, because the warehouses, well, they don't have a production, so doubling the amount of people in them is actually going to double their efficiency as well. From a production point of view, one of the best buildings you can unlock is the Entertainer's Guild Hall. This is going to increase your all hands on deck production from plus 50 to plus 80, but without increasing the production input. So this is just a 30% additional production for free. Where can you find that one? Well, it is all the way up here in the top talent tree, so in the notoriety tree on the 3rd level. There's the Entertainer's Guild Hall right here. This is one of the most important production buildings you can unlock. Regarding the all hands on deck, even without the guild hall, it's a really nice way to increase your production, assuming you have enough drifters to, staff your base. So make sure you don't do it too early on, but the plus 50% production, even with double the upkeep, is still worth it because you don't run out of space quite as soon. While you're building your base, of course, take into consideration your required inputs and outputs. So for example, if you look at the cassava oven over here, you can see I need a total of 6 cassava roots coming in, and that's exactly what one of these cassava pickers is going to be producing once I put the all hands on deck buff enabled on this. So, a 1-to-1 ratio, but for other buildings you might need only one building for 2 other buildings, and optimizing your production lines like that is definitely worth it. Generally speaking, try to centralize your production as much as possible, because that makes it easier to get it to the outskirts of your island, but you're not going to be able to avoid, building on your entire island anyway. If you do need to transport things across your island, try to put an occasional warehouse in the middle of that export route. That just makes things a little bit more efficient. Of course, don't be afraid, again, to use the all hands on deck buff to do that. But most importantly, try to keep your production lines or your logistics lines as flat as possible. That just saves you a lot of production and transportation time. If you do need to go vertical, then make sure that you use some of the unlocks that you have available, like the elevator lift you can see up here, because that will save your people so much time going up and down your base compared to just using the rope ladders and things like that. Even though you can have up to 6 ships at the same time, you only really need 4. Actually, you need less than that if you just want to focus on one area of interest. But if you do have 4 ships in total, you can use the specialized version specifically, and that will make sure you have a very well-diversified fleet that can handle any of the events that might be on the map. Even though your island can get attacked, it is super easy to defend with just a small gun tower for the majority of the early and the mid game, so don't stress about that too much. Just make sure that whenever you build a new pirate camp, that you do check for any new openings to your base that you might enable by building it, for example over here, that will unlock a new entrance to my base, and try to position your cannons in such a way that they can ideally even handle more than one direction. So for example, a cannon over here would be able to handle both of those directions and defend against that very efficiently. Don't worry about the ammunition too much. If you have a very simple setup for your ammunition production, you're going to have way more black powder than you're ever going to need for your towers. So all in all, defending your base should be very straightforward and not something you have to stress about too much. There's going to be a ton of quests on the map that you can take up, and especially once you have several captains, it might be a little bit annoying to kind of figure out who goes where. However, the game makes that very easy for you. If you select a captain, it will actually highlight which of the missions those captains are very suitable for in combination with their ship. So for example, if I select a Raven over here, I can see, okay, he has a very powerful ship that is very well equipped to handle these quests, while, for example, Charlie over here is very suited for this particular quest, but not as much for everything else, because those are not highlighted, and so on. So you can kind of cycle through your captains to see who you should be sending where. Don't stress about the deeds too much. You will complete a lot of them while naturally playing the game. The only one that is a little bit more difficult in my opinion is the Empire tree over here. So make sure you have one of your ships equipped with teach, because that's one of the easiest ways to unlock a couple of points. And just keep expanding your base. The pirate camps is pretty straightforward. Now the Crown Port's pillaging is actually something you can very easily complete as well, because all of the large islands have one pirate town or more on them that you can repeatedly attack. Every time you do one of those repeatable events, there's a couple of other ones as well. For example, one of them is for the smuggling runs over here. They will go on a cooldown, but that cooldown is only 1 hour. Now that's not an hour of real life time, unless of course you are playing on the standard game speed, but you can turn up the game speed up to 4 times, so basically you can do those quests every 15 minutes in real life, and there are several of them across the map that will just keep being there, right accessible for you to do again and again. When it comes to spending your points, I would highly recommend that you put your points into logistics as much as possible. So like the aerial lift, for example, and the elevator are going to massively increase the throughput on your production lines. But try to stay away from very basic upgrades, like for example, additional plank production. That is not something you're going to need in bulk, so having just the basic version of this is going to be just fine. However, there are some other production items, like for example leather, that tends to be a bottleneck and very hard to skill up. So focus on that, and very important things like anything that your pirates are going to need, especially the higher ranked ones. Just flat upgrades to your buildings is of course very welcome. For the first rank, I would say that the Trading Post Unique building and the Crow's Nest are both worth getting early on, and especially the Crow's Nest. Building a couple of them can really pay back itself very quickly if you build that pretty much as soon as you can unlock it. But of course, do take care that these things do cost gold, so it takes a little while for that gold to be earned back. When it comes to the second tier, I highly recommend that you pick up one of the banners. Doesn't really matter which one you pick up, just as long as you do, because this will allow you to increase your cohesion capacity. And since you're going to get cohesion from pretty much everything that you do anyway, at least anything that you do successfully, you want to make sure that you increase your cap so it doesn't go to waste. Don't be afraid to spend some cohesion on events and stuff like that as well. Of course, you don't want it to drop to 0, but you're gonna have to really do a bad job in order for that to happen. So just use it as a resource and make sure that you increase the cap so you can start stocking it up. Because of course, remember, there are deeds, I think especially in the left part of the technology tree, to actually increase your cohesion to certain limits. Yeah, there we go. So you want to do that as early as possible to get those points up and running. Of course, in general, you want to try to match up your ships to the events as best as you can, but there will be random events happening as you go across the map, so you won't always be able to perfectly optimize it, and that is of course where your crew comes in. Make sure you always have your ships fully crewed and repaired before you venture out. Make sure they have all their supplies, and you should be able to handle pretty much anything. Once you're in an encounter, look at the goal, of course, and try to work towards that, but generally speaking, you just want to look at what the enemy is doing and try to counter that. Now, there is a priority system that I would recommend that you keep in mind while doing this, because it's by far the most important to keep your crew alive. These are the most expensive things to replace, or people, I guess, to replace, while repairing your ship or resupplying your ship is relatively inexpensive. So, you know, keep your crew alive. That's a pretty good way to start. Then, secondly, keeping your supplies up and running. Whenever they take an action that is going to harm your supplies, ideally try to counter that, because that's the equivalent of you losing out on several actions before you have to resupply. And especially if you have a longer event, running out of supplies at the wrong moment can really be harmful, because at that point you will need to switch to your support actions and you will need to take some form of damage in order to regain your supplies. Now that includes, if you are not careful, taking damage from your own actions to your crew. So ideally I would always go for the one that damages your health, but at the same time your opponent is also going to do an action, and if that's a harmful one and you're not countering it, yeah, you're gonna take a lot of damage. So try to avoid this as much as possible. And if you are in a situation, for example, like I am right now, where the enemy is not going to do any damage to you, and you are on low supply, which I am not at the moment, then it might be a good moment to take some damage, gain your supplies, you don't have to worry about it later. Then, last but not least, your health is not that important. If you're losing a fight, try to still keep your crew alive, because you can actually save them afterwards. Now, if you do lose an event, that's not the end of the world, especially not if you lost it by losing the health of your ship, because you will be able to save your crew, hence, try to keep them alive. And the only thing that will really happen is you will lose any loot that was on the ship, as well as access to your captain for 30 minutes. That sounds like really long, but if you're playing at full speed, times 4, it's only 7.5 minutes and your captain is back. And you're gonna have to rebuild their ship anyway, so, you know, they can have a lounge break for a little bit. If you really want, you can save your captain. You will lose all the people on the ship and you will lose all the loot, so typically this is not the option you want to pick. And then last but not least, if there are a lot of valuable things on your ship, you can also save those. So, you know, keep that in mind in case there is something very valuable on your ship that you were just transporting back to your base, for example. However, it is going to cost you quite a bit of cohesion if there was a lot of stuff on your ship, so take that into consideration. Something else that is really easy to miss if you don't pay attention is that there are some friendly ports around that you can visit. So let's say you have a ship that took a lot of damage, lost a lot of crew and is out of supplies, or any of those above, then you can go into a friendly port and you can repair your ship. That's pretty cheap. You can spend gold, but ideally you want to spend rope or planks on that. That's super easy to make anyway, especially the planks. You should have an infinite supply of those, so that is super easy. You can also hire a crew. So depending on what type of crew you're going to hire, that's going to be more or less expensive. Like I said, this is really expensive, so try to avoid this if you can, but you can restock your ship this way if you want. And last but not least, and this is something you would be doing anyway a lot of the times, is you can restock your supplies. Now the easiest way to do that is by use of black powder, which you should be producing non-stop anyway. And considering, as you can see, that you're not really using black powder for a lot of things, you should have an ample supply of that, and this will restock your ship and basically put it back up to full, and you can continue on your journey without having to go all the way back to your main town. Speaking of things not being the end of the world, if you are dealing with some unrest in your base, for example, you don't have enough housing and your satisfaction is starting to drop, once that hits 0, you will get unrest. You will have an event popping up that is asking you, how fast are you going to fix this? Typically, well, you should be fixing it before the unrest happens already, but that will sneak up in you sometimes. Don't worry too much about it. Even if you lose that event, you're still only going to take a little bit of a hit to cohesion, and that's it. You're still going to have to deal with the problem, of course. So typically that problem will be either build more houses or supply more food. If you are not supplying your pirates, your crew, with enough, then a very easy solution is just to fire your crew, which you can do very easily by going into manage crew and then just taking them off your ship again. However, if you do this, they're not happy about that, so you will take a pretty significant cohesion loss depending on how many people you removed from the crew. Again, it's not the end of the world, but if this is the reason for your unrest, you might as well just keep the people on your ship and make use of them and fix the actual problem in terms of supply, because, well, you're gonna take that cohesion loss anyway. However, the crew is also a very nice trick that you can kind of abuse in case you're low on drifters in your village. Remember those friendly ports? Well, what you can do is just send a ship there with a minimal crew. You just need one person as a crew in order for your ship to sail, and then you can go and hire some. Now you can just stock up your entire crew. You still need all the materials for that, and it is going to cost you quite a bit of gold, but in a case of emergency, this is a pretty cheap way, especially if you just go for swabbies, in order to restock the people on your island. Then a couple of final notes in terms of designing your production chains. Pretty much every building in this game will produce stuff at a ratio of a multiple of 4. So 4, 8, 12, 16, and so on. So if you know that one building is going to be producing 8 of something, then it's very likely that the next building is going to either ask for 8 or 4 or 16. So you know exactly in the number of those buildings that you need in order to have everything function optimally. In addition to that, keep in mind that your resources can actually run out, although it takes a very long time for them to do so. So don't worry about this early on, but especially in the end game, these resources can run out. Once they do, you still get those resources. You will just have to deal with a 50% decrease in productivity. So not the end of the world, but keep that in mind. And then finally, a last tip: only build what you actually need, because in a lot of these city builder games, it's kind of tempting to build a lot of the basic stuff from the get-go and just overbuild a lot of things. But in this game, you don't really need that much items. For example, I've built a single sawmill on my entire island that we have over here, and I actually turned it off because I'm sitting on 7,000 planks. And I'm using planks pretty much only to build buildings, and I'm using a lot of that. But when you're producing, well, whatever it's producing, when you're producing 11 of them per minute, yeah, you're gonna be producing way more than you actually need. So don't hesitate to turn off some of the buildings, especially when you're low on drifters, and put them to use in some of your more advanced buildings while you go out and find some more people for your island. And yeah, I think that about covers it. This should put you in a very good place to become the master of the seas, build yourself an amazing but also very efficient pirate town, and, you know, become king of the pirates if you're so inclined. Now, if you have any questions about the game, do let me know in the comments. I try to answer all the questions I get. And either way, let me know if you found this useful. Don't forget to like the video if you did, and subscribe to the channel for more. And I hope to catch you in the next one.